specialists. If you have questions or if there is anything I can assist you with in any way, if you need additional resources on the topics we're covering, always feel free to contact me at sarah.stolman@la.gov. I think one of my favorite things that's come out of this series is really getting to know you guys from across the state and, answering questions and, listening to your ideas and your reflections, which have given me great thoughts and ideas about instructional practices that you can use in the classroom. So definitely reach out. That I love that. And I love getting to know you guys and talking to you guys. If you're a social media user, definitely share your thoughts and ideas using the hashtags Louisiana Literacy and the hashtag Reading Revival. It's just a great way for us to kind of connect across, our big, beautiful state. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. I did want to bring to your attention some exciting developments based on your feedback. So, some of the feedback that we've gotten in our feedback forums is that, we want more opportunities to connect or to ask questions, and when we talked about this series, we talked about how this was going to be a lot of me presenting information, and it wasn't really a back and forth kind of thing. Because the idea with these is that they're here for you guys now, but they're also posted to our literacy library so that people can use them in the future as part of their collaborative planning or as part of their PLCs. But we definitely wanted to give you that opportunity to come ask us questions, especially now as you are getting ready for this next school year. So what we have done is we have set up weekly Science of Reading implementation office hours. So beginning this Friday, we're going to hold the Science of Reading implementation office hours from 10:30 in the morning to 11. Very informal, just pop in with your questions. We're not really going to present anything. We're just going to be there to support you. If you're like, hey, I was thinking about setting up my classroom and I have this question. What should I do here? Come, we'll talk through it. I'll be there. Dr. Lisa Holliday will be there. Katasha Edwards, our literacy PD specialist for leaders, will be there. So definitely join us. Somebody on our team is going to post that link in our chat. So save that. The password will be literacy, but we're really excited about this. And we hope to keep it going through the school year, but we know 10:30 to 11 is not a very good time for teachers during the school year. So we're going to talk with you guys about a better time once school starts. Like, would you rather before school, after school, or maybe a combination of both? So definitely jump in on that if you have questions or if you just want to talk. We're there. Reminder, because this is a big Zoom call, if you could just make sure your video is off and you're muted. You guys have been wonderful about that. If you have any accessibility needs, or if you have a colleague who has accessibility needs and that's prevented them from logging on, definitely reach out to LDOE Communications at la.gov, and they'll be happy to assist so that everybody can benefit from this experience. Just a reminder, in our last session, what we did was we focused on decoding. So we spent time describing what decoding is, why it's important, and how you can support your students' ability to decode with automaticity. So throughout this entire series, we've been kind of discussing the strands of Scarborough's reading rope. We started with just kind of an overview. We talked a little bit about phonemic and phonological awareness. We talked about word recognition. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that I feel like I could talk about for days and days and days. It's my favorite thing to talk about, I think, when it comes to literacy. And that is reading fluency. And so I have a little cartoon here about reading fluency, just because I thought it was cute, from the Family Circus. And it says, "Don't read so fast, Daddy. My ears are slow listeners." And I just thought that was really cute. But today's objective is that by the end of this session, our participants are going to be able to explain the different components of reading fluency. So, when we think about fluency, a lot of times we just think about rate, but fluency is a three-pronged um, like a three-pronged concept, right? We look at rate, we look at accuracy, we look at prosody, and we're going to talk about what each one of those are today. And I'm going to explain to you guys how you can use fluency norms and prosody rubrics to gauge a student's ability to read with fluency. As a teacher, this was one of my favorite things to do because I just saw the immediate impact using this work. So, we'll kind of talk through all of this today. But I think you guys will really enjoy today's session. So, we always start with kind of answering the big question, what is reading fluency? So the National Reading Panel defines reading fluency as the ability to read text with appropriate rate, accuracy, and prosody. Now, rate refers to just kind of how quickly you read your speech, or you read the text, how automatic it is. Accuracy is, as you might expect, how accurate the reading is. Are you making a lot of reading errors? Are you reading it pretty much as it's written? And prosody refers to how it sounds. Do you read with appropriate intonation? Do you read with appropriate expression? And all three of these things go together to make up reading fluency. Now, fluency depends on well-developed word recognition skills. And these are acquired through all of those things we've been talking about in our previous sessions: systematic, explicit instruction in phonemic and phonological awareness in phonics. And then, as we talked about when we talked about language comprehension, strong language comprehension skills also support reading fluency. Research consistently shows that when you know more about a topic that you're reading about, you're going to be able to read that more fluently, right? Even to the point where, a strong knowledge of the topic that you're reading about can kind of compensate for whatever gaps in word recognition skills you might have. So, definitely very important. But as a student's decoding automaticity increases, their reading fluency increases. So as students are able to decode more and more quickly and with increasing levels of automaticity, their reading fluency increases. Now, why is reading fluency important? I want to emphasize that reading fluency is not the end goal of reading instruction, right? We want students to be fluent readers, not just for the sake of being fluent readers, but because fluency is heavily correlated with comprehension, right? A student who is a disfluent reader, who is, decoding sound by sound still, or, making a lot of errors, is an inaccurate reader, is a student who's really going to struggle to comprehend what they read. But a fluent reader is going to be able to comprehend what they read. What we find is that the brain is really wired to comprehend text that is read at roughly the rate of speech, which is approximately 200 words correct per minute. Sometimes you might talk a little faster, it might be a little faster. But our brain is wired to comprehend what we read when we read it at about 200 words correct per minute. Now I'm going to show you guys some norms that you can use to kind of guide your fluency instruction in a little bit. But what you'll see is that in about 6th grade, these norms top out right at about that, right at about 200 words correct per minute. So we're thinking about that. When students are reading, we want it to sound like they talk, and we want it to be moving in the direction of being at roughly the rate at which they talk as well. Now, how do you determine if a student is a fluent reader? So if we're trying to figure out, is our student a fluent reader? Well, it's gonna be different depending on where they're at, right? Like a first grader, what we might say is a fluent first grade reader is very different than what we would expect for a fluent 6th grade reader. But to determine if a student is a fluent reader, it is essential to regularly monitor their reading performance by assessing 3 things: their rate, their accuracy, and their prosody. And like I told you guys, fluency norms have been established for students beginning at the middle of 1st grade until about grade 6. So, if you're a kindergarten teacher and you have a student who's already reading, yeah, you can measure their reading fluency. But we don't have norms for that because typically we're not really interested in reading fluency at these very young levels because the work we're doing there is building their capacity to decode with automaticity. We're building their phonological and phonemic awareness skills. We're building their word recognition skills but by about winter of first grade, we start to have some norms that we can kind of compare their reading fluency to see if that student is on track compared to their peers nationally. And that is a very, very useful tool to kind of make decisions about are they reading successfully for where they're at. Now, how do you determine if a student is a fluent reader? So a student should be assessed using grade level passages to determine their words correct per minute score. So what, as a teacher, what I used to do is like, in our curriculum, we had many different passages that reflected the code that our children had been taught up to that point. So I would use those passages. And really, I tried to do it weekly. I was always a special ed inclusion teacher. So me and my special ed teacher would just kind of knock out these little reading probes. We do these little 1-minute reading probes of our students weekly to determine their words correct per minute. So we'd listen to them read for a minute. We'd see how far they got with their reading. We'd calculate the accuracy and we'd make notes about their prosody. And I was able to track that over time. I'm going to show you guys a tracker in just a little bit. That was similar to what I use. But assuming a minimum accuracy rate of 95%, a student's words correct per minute score can be compared to these fluency norms to determine their reading percentile. And I want to stop right here and emphasize the importance of reading accuracy. So, one of my favorite scholars in the science of reading is Jan Hasbrook, and anybody who talks to me knows that. But a very famous quote of hers is first, foremost, and forever, the foundation of fluency is accuracy. Now I could have a first grade student who's reading 200 words correct per minute at 50% accuracy. Well, that's not good. That child has just become this kind of speed reader without attending to, are the words that they're reading correct? That's not going to support comprehension. The most important thing that we're looking at first, foremost, and forever is the child an accurate reader? So if I've done my 1-minute fluency probe and I kind of cut them off and they read 61 words correct per minute, or they read 61 words per minute, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate that accuracy rate. What percentage of the words that they read were read correctly, right? If that's lower than 95%, then my focus really isn't on improving their rate at all. My focus then turns to analyzing where are those errors? Why are they such an inaccurate reader? Are they struggling with those magic E words? Are they struggling with R-controlled vowels? Are they just making careless, sloppy mistakes? And that's where my attention is going to turn. But if I have another student that read that 61 words per minute at 100% accuracy, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give them more opportunities to develop their reading fluency because they are an accurate reader. And now my goal is just to kind of push their words correct per minute. Now you can see right here, I kind of link to these norms. And this is something that, we'll post in on this in this presentation that you can access on the Literacy Library. But these are my go-to norms. So you see right here in first grade, we're not even really concerned in the fall with the words correct per minute. But by the middle of first grade, you can see here that these are norms to compare. So as a first grade student who around January is reading 29 words correct per minute at 95% accuracy, a minimum of 95% accuracy, would be reading at about the 50th percentile compared to all first graders across the country. Whereas a student who was reading 97 words correct per minute at 95% accuracy would be reading at the 90th percentile. Now, largely as a teacher, what I would do is I'd be really, if they're at that 50th percentile and they're an accurate reader, I'm pretty comfortable with the progress they're making. But those students that I'm really focusing on in terms of my reading instruction are going to be those kids that are falling below the 50th percentile. I'm looking at like, what is the nature of their errors? Like, are they still, not decoding with automaticity? What's the holdup there? And those are the things that I'm looking at. But this was also a very helpful resource because it would allow me to set goals. And like I said, like I would monitor this weekly. Maybe you could do it bi-weekly. I just liked it weekly because it was ongoing data for me to kind of push my students. But if I had a student who was reading 29 words correct per minute, I knew that by the spring, and if they were to maintain the 50th percentile, they'd have to read at least 60 words correct per minute. And my goal was really always to even push them up a little bit so that they were reading at even higher levels. So I would set short and long-term goals for them. And we're going to jump right into that in a second. I'm going to pull this back up. But that is a very helpful resource. Have that printed out, laminate it, hang it up in your room, because you're going to go to that a lot. And it will really make a difference in your instruction. Now, the other thing I want to say is something else that's very important to look at is their prosody. Now, this is hard because whereas like the words correct per minute is just a very objective thing. This is how many they read. There's no question about it. It is what it is. But prosody is a little more subjective, right? Like what I think sounds great might be different than what you think sounds great. So as grade level teams, it's really important for y'all to kind of train your ear so that y'all can kind of have a shared understanding about what you think fluent reading sounds like. And you can do that by videoing, by having like little learning walks in your grade level where you might go and watch as teachers administer little fluency probes and then have discussions about what the reading sounds like. But a really great tool that I would always use are these little prosody rubrics, right? And so you can see that, this is just a little, a rubric, and you can say, okay, like when it comes to expression and volume, like does he read in a quiet voice, like he's kind of timid about getting it out? And then, and that would be a 1, whereas a 4, on the other hand, would be a child that reads with varied volume and expression appropriate to the text that they're reading. Sounds like they're talking. We have guidance here on their phrasing, on their smoothness, and on their pace too. And I would use this too, because if I had a kid who was accurate and read at an appropriate rate, but it still sounded kind of robotic, this would be a really great tool for me to help build their expression, because that expression is going to impact comprehension too. And it's also going to impact their ability to kind of increasingly read at the rate of speech. And to understand what they're reading. So this tool was a very, very helpful tool for me as a teacher. And I would, kind of have this there, and I would have a copy for each of my students and just kind of be marking it. But again, it's a little more subjective, and the more that you can kind of develop as a team, a shared understanding of what this sounds like, the better you guys will be and the more successful you'll be in targeting their needs. And so definitely keep this in mind too as you're assessing their prosody. Now, the question always is, what do you do if a student is not reading fluently? So generally speaking, if a student is reading about 10 words correct per minute or more below the 50th percentile, based on 2 cold reads, and when we say cold reads, it means a passage they haven't encountered before, of grade level decodable passages, targeted intervention is likely needed. So those students who are reading at the 50th percentile or higher, it's not to say that you're not going to want to kind of target their needs and analyze like their reading and kind of enrich them. But those are students who really are thriving in the core. So that core curriculum that you're providing for those students is working. You might want to give them, some opportunities to enrich and to push them to grow. But for those students who are 10 words correct per minute or more below the 50th percentile, that's where you're really going to want to dig in and set some goals and really try to push them so that they can get to where they need to be. You need these reading probes. I cannot emphasize enough how valuable these are. Like I said, it was just a 1-minute probe. If you have 20 minutes, if you have 20 students in your class, you'll get pretty proficient in, okay, like 1 minute, next 1 minute, you can get it done in 20 minutes. And if there are multiple teachers in the classroom, y'all can kind of split it up and really knock them out quickly. But that data is going to help you. It's going to give you information on any gaps in code knowledge. It's going to give you information on their reading fluency, all of these different things, but it's all dependent on you analyzing that. Now, one thing I would do with my first grade students, when I was a first grade teacher, and that they loved, they just loved this, was each of them had like a little fluency folder. Okay, so they'd have the fluency folder in it, and then after they read the passage, I'd keep it in there, but we had a little fluency graph for them to graph their progress. They loved seeing the growth. And I used to always like tell my teacher friends and stuff like that. It was so interesting because, as we introduced new aspects of code, like when we got to Magic E or when we got to our controlled vowels, I'd always notice a dip in their fluency. And at first I'd be like, oh my goodness, so what's going on? But as I analyzed it, I noticed that, they were getting hung up a little bit on those Magic E words. So I started to do some targeted intervention, and then they zoom right back up and their fluency would continue on that like upward trajectory. But if you're having that ongoing data, and I think that's why I love fluency so much, because it's such, you can get so much good data that you can do so much with. You're going to see that immediate impact. And really the sky is the limit in terms of what you can do and how you can grow their reading. If you carefully gather and analyze that data. So if you do these probes and you find that the student is not reading fluently, that's when you're going to start asking yourself these questions. Does the student struggle with decoding or blending? A lot of times something that I would see is they would, decode the words, but then they'd have a hard time putting them back together. They might see the word d, g, they go d, g, and then they go like dob or something like that, right? So I might work on that decoding or blending. You might look and see, is it just particular phoneme grapheme correspondences? Like I said, is it just the Magic E words that they're really hung up with? Then you can target your intervention that way. Do they read in a very robotic way or without a lot of expression or intonation? Then you target that. You can do some fluent phrasing activities. Or do they, really, are they at the point where they're just really struggling with phonemic or phonological awareness? Maybe you need to back up to that and do work there to support them. But you're going to start asking all of these questions to determine where they're at in their reading. Now, how do you ensure a student is making sufficient progress? Well, like I've said like several times throughout this, I love reading. I love just talking about, learning about, tracking reading fluency. And I think it's because I love math too. And it kind of brings some numbers into it, maybe, I don't know. But one of the things that I would often do is I would use a fluency tracking tool. Now I had it in a little spreadsheet and everything, and you can track it any way that you want. But I'm going to show you one that I just kind of generated here. But you can see here what I would do is, so I have the student name, Sarah Stolman, right? And I do like a baseline words correct per minute. So say she was reading 32 words correct per minute at 98% accuracy. I kind of put where she was in terms of her percentile based on that norms chart. And then I'd set a long-term goal. And like I said, my goal for my students was always at a minimum that they leave first grade reading at least at the 50th percentile. For many of my students, I wanted a much higher than that. But for all of my students, my goal was that at least they'd be at that 50th percentile. So that was my long-term goal. Now, if it was a student who was already there reading at the 90th percentile, my goal would be a little bit higher for them. So I'd set that SMART goal. So Sarah will read at least 90 words correct per minute at 95% accuracy by May 1st. And then I would kind of figure out what is the weekly improvement that she needed to make to meet that long-term goal. So she's reading 23 and we're in September and she's at 9 and we need her at 90. I really need her to be like kind of making 5 words correct per minute growth each week. And so doing those weekly probes allowed me to see if she was on track and growing in that way. And so I just keep like a little tally, and this is the kind of thing I would keep stapled in their Fluency folder. And so this is a little 9-week thing. You'd have 4 of these. Their words correct per minute, their accuracy, their prosody rating, using one of those prosody rating scales, what passage I use, and whether or not that weekly goal was achieved. And guys, this does not take a lot of time. I think that's another thing I love about it. It's just so efficient, but it gives you so much good information that can really, it's a game changer for your instruction, And so every Friday, that was kind of on my lesson plans during my small group time to kind of get this done. And then I'd have it over the weekend and I'd analyze it, and it would guide all of my small groups for the next week. I'm going to come back here. I talked about setting those long and short-term goals, analyzing those reading records. And then the other thing I really want to encourage you guys to do is to analyze those universal screening assessments. So we all use different ones. Some of us use Acadience or Dibbles 8 or STEEP. Whatever you use, those kind of those screening tools that are used 3 times a year, analyze those. What you'll find is if you're tracking your data in your class, you're going to find a lot of correlation between what you see in your class and what happens in those assessments as well. And if there's some big variation or there's some big discrepancy between how they're performing on those and how they're performing in your class, you're going to want to dig into that. But that's not going to happen very often, because the more you're tracking their fluency, the more you're going to see that correlation, and you're really going to be able to predict how they're going to perform on those assessments. But those assessments give you great information on any sort of skill gaps or anything like that might that they might need targeted support in. Now, another thing I want to just talk about, and this is so important, is how do you address fluency with diverse learners? As I mentioned, I was always the special ed inclusion teacher, which is something that, I love and I was very passionate about. But diverse learners do have unique learning needs that must be addressed. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to water down the content. I'm not saying, okay, well, these norms are too high for this student, right? My goals really for the students are the same, but how I get there is different, right? Now, I'm going to set a goal for a student. If I have a student reading at that 50th percentile, I'm going to set that goal for that student, but, they might not be able to just kind of sit there reading independently, or they might do better with, they might need support with prosody. I think about sometimes, I have a son with autism, and, expression might be something that this child needs support with, right? And that might be what prevents them from being a successful reader. So really embrace those principles of universal design for learning, provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. As teachers, it's our job to ensure that our students are given those tools they need to be successful. And reading fluency is not exempt from this responsibility. In fact, these students, I think more than any, need our support, and they need our careful attention to their progress. So just regularly monitoring reading fluency will help teachers determine where there are gaps and where additional support or strategic intervention is needed. And I will say this, you know, like I said, I always had the special ed inclusion class. And, through time, like my special ed teacher and I would collaborate on IEP goals and stuff like that. And these reading fluency measures became invaluable to establishing meaningful IEP goals for reading fluency for the students. So keep that in mind if you're a special ed teacher or if you're our special ed inclusion teacher. These are wonderful ways to track their progress and just it's great data for IEPs too. So just some final thoughts here. Reading fluency, again, it refers to a student's rate, accuracy, and prosody. It's not just rate. So, I think that's one of those myths that I talk about, that fluency is just speed, but it's not. It's rate, accuracy, and expression. We want to grow them in all three of those areas. Reading fluency is highly correlated with reading comprehension. So a student who is a disfluent reader is a student who is going to struggle to comprehend what they read. But as students become increasingly able to read at roughly the rate of speech, which is our goal, they're going to be able to comprehend what they read, and their fluency is not going to inhibit their comprehension. There may be other things that inhibit their comprehension, but the fluency is not there. Reading fluency is something that we can measure as students become increasingly proficient with decoding, so right there around the middle of first grade. And we can also measure their prosody using those prosody rubrics. And all of those things are going to be linked in this presentation. So if you want access to those, once this is posted in the literacy library, you'll be able to click on those and get copies of those along with that tracker that I made. It'll be there. And then finally, our engage lesson or our engage question, because we always like to do that. So if after we read through this, definitely send me your responses for next week's shout outs and we'll have that posted for you. But our question today is one of those scenario questions. Rayanna is a first grade student who is currently reading 21 words correct per minute at 95% accuracy. Her fluency goal for this 9 weeks is 52, and she is not on track to meet that goal based on her current performance. Analyzing her weekly reading record, her teacher notices that she struggled to decode the following words: cape, late, jar, sir, and face. Her teacher notices that she will often spend considerable time decoding these words only to decode them incorrectly. How would you support this student? So, one of my team members is going to post this in our chat. Send me an email or tweet your response. And then if you would, please fill out our session feedback form. I really value your feedback. It gives us opportunities and ideas for how we can support you guys. That's where the idea of the office hours came from. So we do appreciate that. And this is also where you can get your CLU credit. So if you need CLU credit, fill this out and make sure that you answer that question so that I can get that for you. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can contact us either at Louisiana Literacy at la.gov or sarah.stolman@la.gov. And we really appreciate you guys joining us here in your summer. You guys are amazing. If you need anything, we're here to support you guys. All of our previous sessions are in that Louisiana Literacy Library. So check those out and have a great afternoon. Bye.